Well, good morning and welcome once again to Elevenses. You're watching Kevin Williams here with my show, which hopes to give you some topical biking news, some possibly controversial views, and some riding skills tips to think about. Well, it's a reasonably sunny morning out there today here in London at 11 o'clock. It's 24th of March, so just a year and a bit after lockdown began, and we're on show number 124. And as I said last time out, I never realised I would be doing this for an entire year, but here we are. Clive says good morning. Hello there, Clive. In today's show, what have we got for you? We have Triumph's new TE1 electric motorcycle design project is coming along nicely. Driver is seriously injured by a loose cat's eye on the A1M. The BSB calendar is announced with the first races in June. Hanway's G30 borrows looks from Royal Enfield's Himalayan. A very quick snippet on an unexpected hazard caused by hi-vis clothing. And then we'll have a look at the better biking topic, which is whether or not advanced riders have more advanced crashes. That's something that will no doubt fuel a bit of a debate. So don't forget, if you have a question, if you have a comment, anything at all you want to talk about, topics for discussion at a future date, drop them into the comment stream and I will get back to you at the end of the show. Right, so okay, on with the first story of the morning then. Triumph announced back in May 2019, I'd actually forgotten, I have to admit, that they were collaborating on what they call Project TE1. And it's an electric motorcycle design exercise, but it's now taking shape and it's beginning to deliver on its design objectives, which it was basically to develop specialist electric motorcycle technology and an integrated solution to basically designing a bike around this power source. And they've announced that they've completed phase 2 of the project. The project itself is a collaboration between Triumph Motorcycles, obviously enough, Williams Advanced Engineering, Integral Powertrain Limited's eDrive division, and the WMG department of the University of Warwick. I'm not quite sure what WMG stands for, actually, but it's all funded apparently by the government's Office for Zero Emission Vehicles. So what they have got together now is a battery and powertrain prototype together with the first concept drawings, and they were all revealed yesterday. So they're hoping the prototype of this motorcycle will be unveiled sometime by the end of the year. The test results are claimed to show significant innovation in mass battery technology and powertrain performance, which exceeds the targets set by the UK Automotive Council to be delivered by 2025, which is good news. So basically, the aim that Triumph have is to create an electric bike which meets the needs to cut carbon emissions without compromising on the riding experience. And if you have a look at that, you'll see that although it's actually a ground-up new model, there are styling cues from probably the 2021 Speed Triple 1200 RS. It's got a similar headlamp around the front of it. Suspension is similar, and the single-sided swing arm is also familiar. And that's probably to keep the traditional motorcycle fans happy with the product. Williams themselves are providing a lightweight battery design and a battery management system, while the, as I said, Integral Powertrain's eDrive division is developing what they term a power dense electric motor, and a silicon carbide inverter. So that looks something like that. So you'll notice that appears to be water cooled, which is interesting. The motor there produces no less than 180 horsepower, which should be enough for anybody. It also weighs just 10 kilograms. So the old saw that electric bikes are overweight, it's starting to go out the window fairly quickly, actually. So Nick Blower, who's the Triumph CEO, he said, this important project will provide one of the foundations for our future electric motorcycle strategy, which is ultimately focused on delivering what riders want from their Triumph, the perfect balance of performance, handling and real-world usability with genuine Triumph character. Triumph's Chief Product Officer Steve Sargent said that their aim was to deliver an electric motorcycle that feels and performs like a Triumph without any compromise. And in essence, the project is all about creating a platform for Triumph's future electric motorcycles, hand in hand with the creation of a powertrain, battery and the infrastructure that makes it possible. So basically, the starting point is that they want to produce something that appeals to riders who like the sound and feel of a petrol engine. And they say that basically includes considering the type of riding, range, feel and nature of power and torque delivery together with the ergonomics and the bike controls. Andrew Cross, who's the Chief Technical Officer at Integral, said the incredibly small but powerful electric motor they built was based on industry-leading technologies that will absolutely define the future of electric motorcycles, starting with this TE1 project. So there we go. The overall aim is to define something with Triumph DNA. And they basically, what they're not going to do is build something for the sake of being different, which is a rather different approach to what we see with some of the other electric motorcycles that I have talked about in the past. Right, so who have we got arriving? We have Russell, who said, good morning. Nigel has also appeared. Martin Foster says, good morning, good evening. How do you like e-bikes? I'm interested, but I don't own one yet. I did test ride a couple of Zeros 2 years ago, and I thoroughly liked them. They were a rather different experience from a petrol engine, but the sort of the whoosh, basically, as you twist the throttle was quite undeniable. And the SRX, is it? I can't remember, or SRZ, the very complicated lettering system. It's the high performance one, basically. Makes a really interesting jet engine noise when you open the throttle, Martin. So actually, I really enjoyed it. Clive says, great, looks similar to my Street Triple. If it was fairly quick charging and not too crazy money, I consider it. So yes, okay. So I think, you know, we see more and more people starting to think in terms of motorcycles with electric power. Right, so moving on anyway. A driver was seriously injured on Saturday evening as a loose cat's eye went through the windscreen of his car. Police were called to reports of the crash, which was near junction 3 on the A1M southbound, which is in the Hatfield area. The air ambulance was also scrambled to the scene, and a Herts police spokesman said one vehicle had struck the loose cat's eye, which became airborne and collided with a second vehicle, piercing the window and striking the driver. Frankly, looking at the ever disintegrating roads that we have to cope with in the UK, I'm surprised there aren't more incidents like this. All right, don't forget, if you want to catch up with these shows, you can find them here on Facebook, or you can head over to my YouTube channel, Survival Skills UK. Don't forget they're all important UK on the end. And you can always find them over there, along with various other videos that I've done over the last year or two. So what else is in the news? Well, bike racing is back, but the bad news is not for a while. The 2021 Superbike calendar has been announced, and it starts with the first race in late June. Now, this is in order to comply with the step 3 of the government's roadmap plan and capacity limits that apply to non-seated venues as we come out of COVID restrictions. As they had no idea how many people could actually get into an event, it was hard to put a limit on which would have joined or dealt with the restrictions properly. So basically, the first meeting is at Alton Park on the weekend of the 26th, 27th of June, and that is after all restrictions are hopefully lifted. The good news for spectators, at least, is all rounds are going to be triple headers. Meanwhile, if you are MotoGP inclined, that series gets underway at the weekend in Qatar. Coverage is on BT Sport, although I believe there are short highlights on YouTube. One race notable by the absence of news, it was the Isle of Wight road races. I actually went looking for that yesterday to see if there was any update from that. The inaugural 2020 races went by the board. Basically, the timetable that was proposed seemed a bit unlikely even before the pandemic struck, but there have been no updates since. And looking at the website, there have been no updates since July last year either. So I don't think there's any chance of races this year on the Isle of Wight 2021. And my guess is that the whole project has probably been forgotten. Something that the Chinese don't do is forget what other motorcycle manufacturers do in terms of building bikes. They have a long history, in fact, of borrowing design innovations from other manufacturers. I still recall the story of one of their companies putting a leaning three-wheeler on the stand at the Milan bike show. And somewhat to their surprise, it was impounded by Italian customs officials because the Piaggio team had gone over from their own stand where they had their Piaggio MP3 leaning three-wheeler and found that the Chinese bike was basically a bolt-for-bolt copy of it. It was actually identical, so the customs went in and removed it from the stand. So have a quick look at this particular motorcycle. Let's just get the picture back up on screen. There we go. Let's actually bring it up full screen. It doesn't make any difference. It's very similar to look at to the Royal Enfield Himalayan. In fact, from a distance, you might actually think it was the Royal Enfield Himalayan, but actually it's the Hanway G30. So outwardly similar, but actually it's not a copy. It just borrows many of the styling cues, and it even gets some updates over and above what the Indian built machine would deliver. For example, the Indian bike still has a halogen headlight. This one gets an LED. It's got a TFT instrument cluster, and you get upside down forks too, although I've always been slightly dubious about the benefits of those. On a bike like this, what did catch my eye, though, is if you look at the wheels closely, is that you'll find that the spokes are laced to the outside of the rim rather than the middle of the rim. And what that means is that the bike can actually use tubeless tyres. Now, tubeless spoked wheels are something that manufacturers have been particularly slow to bring to the table. Yeah, I agree. Tube might be easier to deal with mid-Sahara, but mid-M25 on a busy Friday night in the rain, I want the reassurance that I'm unlikely to suffer a blowout, having had a number of instant deflations on tubed wheels in the past, including one very high-speed one on the M25, which scared the living daylights out of me, and another as I was in the middle of a corner, and I was very, very fortunate indeed to find a beautifully mown piece of front lawn to crash on. I want tubeless tyres on my bikes. I do not want to buy anything with a tube, except my classic 250, which I will live with because I rarely ride that much more than about 40 miles an hour. But frankly, I'm surprised that in days when motorcycles like this have compulsory ABS, the Hanway, of course, has dual channel ABS. I'm amazed tubed tyres are actually still allowed on a modern road bike. The motor is very different too. The Chinese bike is pushed along by a water-cooled 250 four-stroke single, and the power output is a bit down on the Himalayan too, 26 horsepower, which is actually the same as my classic 250. It has the predictable front and rear discs, monoshock rear suspension. Tank is 19 litres big. So given the estimated top speed of about 80 85 perhaps from that 26 horsepower, you should be getting a handy range, I would expect, of well over 250 miles. Anyway, it's been launched in 2 variants in China. It's already on sale at 17,280 yen, which according to my Google calculator comes in at just under £2,000, which means it'll probably be on sale in the UK for about £4,000. Anyway, right, very quickly, a snippet here from the Wellington Area Road Skills Group, a bunch of riders who run a sort of self-help scheme for inexperienced riders out in Wellington, New Zealand. I had a ride out with them a couple of years ago. One of them mentioned hazard from conspicuity clothing that I have to admit I hadn't considered. He said at the weekend he had to avoid a high-vis jacket blowing across the Wellington urban motorway. So yes, high-vis cheeky stuff. Right, okay, so on to the final thing I want to talk about today, and that's motorcycling, advanced motorcycling, and whether we simply teach advanced motorcyclists to have advanced crashes. That was something that a former instructor, a buddy of mine called Malcolm, said once long ago. He seems to have forgotten he said it, but he did honestly say that. And it was also something that was somewhat confirmed when I sat through a presentation by Dr. Chris Burgess of Exeter University, who was one of the presenters on, or one of the panelists on a talk program on the Road Safety GB powered two-wheeler event that's still ongoing. And it brought to mind something that medical schools include as part of their program. They usually include some kind of ethical oath. One of these is, above all, do no harm. There's a Latin original which I won't even attempt to pronounce, but it's this idea that we should do no harm before we even think about doing anything else is something that I think motorcycle training should attend to. That should be our starting point long before we actually start to try to think how we're going to improve riders, what skills we're going to give them, what benefits they'll get from our training. We ought to ask ourselves, what could we be doing that might make things worse? Now, last week I mentioned that as part of this wider research program to evaluate advanced riding that was talked about on the Road Safety GB event, the IM Road Smart had commissioned Agilicis to survey advanced and non-advanced riders. And what they basically looked at was attitudes to safety, riding behaviour, self-reported incident history, and speed choices in a range of road scenarios. And the conclusion that the IAM drew was that their coaching delivers safer, more confident riders who get more enjoyment out of their motorcycling, although they did fill that statement with some caveats, including the fact that the results of the study weren't statistically conclusive. But what they did find as well within those conclusions was that IM riders are more likely to be involved in single vehicle collisions. Now, we know from accident statistics that most of these actually happen out of town, and they often involve more mature riders on bigger machines, which happens to be the IM demographic, of course. Collisions between bikes and other vehicles are by far and away the biggest collision type in urban areas. And this is where younger, less experienced, less likely to be advanced riders on smaller capacity machines tend to be overrepresented. The study also found that IM Road Smart respondents tend to select a higher speed choice than similar motorcyclists. Now, I pointed out last time round that this conclusion was actually based on some fairly primitive methodology, basically a couple of photos, one with, one without a hazard, and then asking for what people would consider a suitable speed. Both groups consistently suggested a lower speed when the hazard was present, but the IM group consistently also suggested a somewhat higher speed was appropriate in both instances, rather than what I would have expected, which would have been a higher speed with no hazard and a lower speed than the control group when the hazard was present. And that also put me in mind of a report from Bike Safe Scotland way back in 2003, when they found that some participants may be riding faster in some situations after taking part. And what they proposed was there could be some risk compensation. As riders feel they've become better, they therefore become better equipped to ride at a speed, is in their own belief. And the IM response to the study does actually suggest that there could be an increased confidence issue amongst IM Road Smart members. And whilst they say that in some ways it's a good thing, they say to ensure it does not spill over into overconfidence. The other issue that I noticed, which suggests that riders possibly are a bit overconfident after training, is that they blame other road users for crashes far more than the other control group, which is really rather interesting. I'd need to have a bit of a think about that and work out why it actually is. But come back to the speed issue. If the IAM training is promoting higher or is resulting in higher speeds, does advanced training actually promote higher speeds? Now, this is a question that usually gets me into hot water with advanced riders, because most of them will say, oh no, it doesn't. But here is a direct quotation from a website promoting a ROSPA Advanced Motorcycle Instructors Services. He says, the page is titled, How to Get Round Corners Faster. And he says that results from being smoother and safer. And he says he'll answer the question about how to keep up with other riders as they smoothly negotiate hairpins and long sweeping bends at seemingly breakneck speeds. So there's speed being promoted in a very open fashion. The problem is that we have to weigh up the pros as well as any con with anything we're doing. We have to understand the benefit as well as the potential risks that we face if we employ that particular technique. Now, some years ago, I was reminded that while I was thinking about all this last week, that I had training out on a course in Wales some years ago. As always, I start these courses with a short sort of informal assessment, and what it showed was that he was quite a competent rider, pretty highly competent, but there was one repetitive fault, and that was sitting on the centre line around blind left-hand bends. And when I say on the centre line, you know, it literally tires an inch or two inside it, so the leaning bike was just about inside the white line, but barely so. So we had a bit of a chat, and his justification was it's how the police ride. And he went on to explain that he'd done a course with a well-known training school with which promotes police style riding, and they showed him that he should ride right out on the centre line to see further round the corner. Okay, so he understood the benefit, the fact that by taking up a wide right position on the left hand, that you get a better view around the corner. So we then had to talk about the cons, the risks involved in doing that. Well, if anything's coming the other way, I'll see it earlier and I'll be able to move out of the way, he said. Now, I've had this debate many times. I've had it with police riders, I've had it with advanced instructors, I've had it with a senior ROSPA examiner, I've had it with riders, but you have to do that risk-benefit analysis. Now, just have a quick look at this photo. I must apologise for it being rather on the blurry side, but what you'll see there is a still snapped from the West Midlands Ride the Right Line video. Now, overall, it was pretty good video. It was produced quite a long time ago, so when I say video, I really do mean VHS cassette. But you can see where the rider is positioned, and if you run the video through, you'll actually see the oncoming cars, all bar one, taking some evasive action themselves to stay further away from the rider. The exception is basically hugging the white line coming the other way, and the bike and the car actually pass surprisingly close. So there's your risk. So what's the benefit? Well, you basically need just to do a bit of basic trigonometry, and you can easily prove to yourself that the benefit from sitting wide right on a left-hand corner is often fairly marginal. And if you don't believe the trigonometry, you can do a simple practical test by parking and literally walking from curb to centre line and back again, and see how much extra you can see from any particular point in the corner. Of course, what we get as we ride is a dynamic view. We're moving towards the bend, so it always appears as if we're seeing a lot more than we really are. But when you do it static, having parked, and obviously don't get run down while you're doing this, you'll be surprised very often how much you can see. If the bend is symmetrical and you walk out 3 meters from the near side to the center line, you'll actually see about 3 meters further around the bend. If you don't fancy doing that, get Google Map out, zoom in on bend, and just use a ruler across the screen, and you can work it out from the satellite view. So what you actually see around the corner depends very much on the bend's shape and precisely where you are in the corner, because there is a point as you near the way out of the bend, the exit, where the view will explode away from you, and you will get that view just a little sooner if you are out near the center line than if you are near the near side of the corner. But it's not nearly as clear cut as those diagrams in roadcraft suggest, because they're exaggerated widthwise dramatically for effect. It gives you the impression that you see a lot more when generally you really don't. Okay, so the problem is, of course, that what do we do with that extra view when we've got it? Now, in theory, of course, what we should do is use it as an extra margin for error. If we see an oncoming car a few meters before we would have seen it in a sort of a less exposed position, we might have to use that extra space to get out of the way. But of course, what everybody does with the extra view is go faster, because we've just extended our limit point. And remember, we set our speed to be able to stop well within the distance we can see to be clear on our side of the road before we reach the limit point. So the further the limit point moves away from us, the further we twist the throttle and up the speed around the bend. So with more speed added, our ability to take some evasive action in that corner is certainly no better, and it's almost certainly worse, simply because of the effect of momentum on speed. There's a square, as you probably know, double your speed, quadruple your stopping distance. It applies to swerving too. You have to move that extra mass, or extra momentum rather, sideways, and that takes extra force on the bars to get the bike to move. Anyway, so back to my trainee. We stopped. I did the verbal explanation. I got the notebook out. I drew some diagrams. We did the static walk from side to side in the road to see what we gained and what we lost by shifting position. So what did the trainee think? Well, he wasn't entirely convinced, I have to say, but he did agree to stop using every centimetre of the lane on this rather narrow and rather twisty Welsh road we were on. And about 2 minutes after we started, he was very glad he did, because now, with him riding around a metre inside the centre line rather than on it, an HGV came around the corner, and it was at least half a metre over the centre line. And what really caught his attention when we stopped and talked about that incident is that he failed to get out of the way with anything like the alacrity that he thought he would. I wouldn't say that he froze, but when he realized he was on a near collision course, his evasive maneuver wasn't the sharp sideways jink of the sort that he told me that in theory he would be capable of if he met something big coming the other way. So although he managed to get the bike sideways a bit, it was mostly the extra space that kept him out of trouble, and certainly not the earlier view of the hazard. And I have to say that after that, he was a lot more cautious on blind left-handers, rather slower and rather further from the centre line. So he had taken on board the risk to using the technique a lot more after that near miss. So it was the near miss really that convinced him, not the theory. So that's it for today. Have a think about that. We'll be back out on the road, hopefully in just a few days' time. And remember, your reactions to developing emergency situations on the road will be somewhat degraded if you've had your 5 month layoff like I have. So take it easy. Start from a sort of actual middle of the lane position when you're trying to position, and develop your steering skills first before you start trying to do what you did 5 months ago in terms of positioning right on the edges of the lane. In terms of what we're going to be allowed to do, by the way, we should be allowed out more freely on March 29th if there are no changes between now and next Monday. Outdoor gatherings will be allowed for up to 6 people, so that does mean small group rides can resume, and outdoor sport is also permitted. The local stay-at-home order also comes to an end, although there will still be a request to minimise travel and stay local. As far as I've seen, there's no specific guidance released yet to apply to motorcycles, but obviously do keep an eye on what's in the press. It could change at a moment's notice. And yes, so that brings us pretty much to the end of the session. Don't forget, the last of the free Friday evening webinars is looking at bike preparation and rider preparation to get back to riding. And this Friday, I'll be looking at some mental tricks to help you cope if you haven't been riding for a long time. Of course, this would also be a great time to head over and watch my 60-second safety videos. They're very short, 60 seconds long, more or less, so you don't have to spend much of your life watching them. And there's always the tips on Tuesday, skills on Friday, Facebook posts, also now going up on my coffee page as well, dual posting over there. And last but not least, don't forget the newsletter. The address is in the header for this show. And pretty much that's it. So stay safe out there. I'll be back with another Elevenses show on Sunday. Right, so thank you very much indeed for watching. Bye for now.